The stars above the dark side of the moon were calm and quiet, but far beyond them something moved fast, and without warning. It was a Varn fleet cutting through space like blades of fire, heading straight for the outer edge of Earth's defense line. Their ships were dark red and covered with glowing lines, each one filled with anger and pride, for the Varn believed in only one rule: strength wins always, and weakness must be destroyed. They had heard of Earth's new ships, and they had laughed. They called them gold toys painted to shine and look strong. But soft inside, the Varn had crushed planets before, and they planned to do it again. They wanted to strike first to show the galaxy who ruled the stars. So they did. Without a message, without a warning, they opened fire. Their missiles burned bright across the void, their plasma beams screamed with heat and rage, and their railguns tore chunks of space behind them. As they moved forward, wave after wave of firepower flew toward the golden ships. But something strange happened, something they did not expect. The Earth ships stood still. They did not dodge, they did not shoot back, they did not even blink. The first wave hit and bounced off the hulls. The second wave struck and broke apart like glass hitting a wall. The third wave slammed into the command ship and vanished like dust in the wind. The Varn watched in silence. Their weapons had hit directly, and nothing had changed. The human fleet floated there, calm, cold, glowing softly under the stars. They did not move, and they did not reply. But inside the ships, the human crews were not afraid. They had seen this in training. They had practiced for this moment again and again, and now they watched as the golden hulls did exactly what they were made to do. On the Varn flagship, Admiral Kroll stared at the screen, his eyes narrow, his fists tight. He barked orders: send more fire, send the heavy cannons, aim for the engines, aim for cores, destroy them now. But the weapons did nothing. Still, the golden ship stayed in place, bright and silent and untouched. Kroll shouted again: target their heat points, find their weak spots, fire all torpedoes. But the golden ship stayed the same, no damage, no cracks, no return fire, just silence and stillness. And that made the Varn nervous. The first time they had attacked and gotten no reaction. No fear, no reply, just those bright golden walls standing strong. One Varn officer whispered, maybe they're shielded. Another said, maybe is a trap. Kroll growled, silence. Fools, they are weak, they just hide. But deep inside, he was not sure. He had seen war, he had destroyed fleets before, but never had his weapons failed like this, never had his prey stayed still and watched. Back in the human command ship, Commander Lyra stood with her crew. She said nothing at first, just looked at the reports. As each wave of fire bounced off their armor, her voice was calm. Status report. The tech officer smiled. All systems stable, no damage. The engineer nodded. Armor temperature rising. But holding at safe level, Lyra looked out the screen and saw the red lights of the enemy blinking in the dark. She took a slow breath and said, hold. Formation, we wait. The crew understood they had trained for this Earth, had built these ships for defense, not attack golden hulls layered with living metal, smart metal gifted by a forgotten ally long ago, shaped by human science and the armor that bent energy and ate heat. The Varn did not know that they thought gold meant weakness. They thought shiny meant soft, but they were wrong. Now the galaxy would see Earth's answer not with fire, not with rage, but with something else, something stronger. Back with the Varn, Kroll watched as more shots failed, as more beams vanished against those shining ships. He slammed his fist on the console. What are they made of? What is this? Why will they not fall? But no one had the answer. Not yet. All they could do was stare at those golden ships, silent, still floating in the dark, like statues of something ancient and terrible. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the Varn fleet, beyond the human fleet, beyond the stars, other eyes were watching, other ears were listening, and they began to whisper too, for the Varn had fired first. But Earth's ships had not flinched. Not once. The Varn fleet hovered in silence, confused and angry. Their weapons had failed, their pride had been shaken, and now their leader, Admiral Kroll, stood in the center of his command bridge, his eyes fixed on the glowing golden ships floating calmly. Before him, his crew looked at each other, whispering with doubt and fear. Some thought it was a trick, some thought it was magic, but no one dared say it too loud. Kroll growled and paced back and forth, his voice sharp. And cold, these humans are playing games. They think they can scare us with gold and silence. They think they are clever, but we will show them what real power looks like. Prepare the next wave, full charge plasma storm load. Every warhead we have, I want their fleet melted to ash. Across the Varn fleet, cannons glowed brighter, engines hummed with energy targeting systems locked, and again the second strike would be even stronger, faster, deadlier. The Varn laughed among themselves, trying to shake off the fear, try and believe this time it would work. This time the golden ships would fall. They fired all at once. A storm of fire and metal missiles shot forward. In perfect lines, plasma beams lit the stars, railguns roared through space. It was a beautiful display of destruction and pride and hate. But when it reached the Earth fleet, everything stopped again. The golden ships took every blast without moving their shields, absorbed the energy. Without a flicker, their hulls shimmered with heat, but did not bend, not one scratch, not one crack. Not one sound. They floated like giants, untouched and calm, and the Varn fleet went quiet again. Inside, the Earth Command Ship Commander Lyra watched the screens, her face calm, her voice steady. She said, "Report the tech officer." Answered second wave, absorbed energy, level still within safe range, outer hull. Remains intact, inner systems, all stable. Lyra nodded, good hold position. "Do not reply, we let them speak with fire. We will answer with silence." Her crew understood this was not a battle. This was a message, and the message was being heard loud and clear across the galaxy. Ships from neutral worlds had begun tuning into the feed, watching the fight, or what looked like a fight, but felt more like a lesson, one side full of rage and fear, and the other full of calm and strength. On the Varn bridge, Kroll slammed his fist again. "What is this? How are they doing this? They must be using advanced shielding." Someone shouted, "Maybe they have allies hidden nearby." Others said, "Maybe their gold ships are fake. Maybe they're made of something else, something we do not understand." Kroll shouted, "Silence. All of you, we are warriors. We do not fear tricks. We do not fear humans. Prepare the next attack." But now doubt had started growing inside the Varn minds, deep and slow. They had never seen this before, never faced a fleet that refused to fight back, that did not fall, that did not speak. Even the youngest soldiers felt something twist in their chest, fear. Kroll tried to push forward, keep them focused, launch drones, scan for weak spots, find an opening. Anything we can break, we will break. But every scan came back strange. The golden ships had no exposed points, no heat spikes, no energy leaks. Their system seemed too perfect, too smooth. It was like they were alive. Back on Earthside, Commander Lyra stood by the window looking out at the stars. Her crew worked in silence. Her voice came soft. "They do not understand. They think we are weak. Because we do not fire, they think silence means fear. But they are wrong. We do not need to shout to be heard. They are listening now." She walked past her officers, checking every system, her heart steady, her mission clear. Earth did not want war. Earth had learned too much in the last one. They had built these ships not to win battles, but to stop them before they began, and now they were doing just that. The enemy mocked what they did not understand. They laughed at the gold. They called them toys. They called them fake. But each laugh grew quieter. Each joke turned to a whisper. Each sneer became a silent stare. And still Earth said nothing. The golden ships floated in formation, perfect lines across the stars. No fear, no rush, just waiting. The Varn fleet buzzed with energy. But that energy began to feel heavy, like a weight pressing on their shoulders. Even Kroll could feel it, something about those ships, something ancient, something powerful and unshakable. He stared at them again, his eyes narrow, his voice lower. "Perhaps we underestimated them. But it is not over yet. Prepare again, bigger cannons, faster missiles. We will break them or die trying." And so the third wave began, but in the back of every Varn mind a question had formed, a quiet question that would not leave. If this is what their ships can do without firing, what happens if they finally choose to strike? The stars watched in silence as one side burned with anger and the other with patience. And all across the galaxy more and more eyes turned to watch. Because the Varn had fired twice and Earth had not flinched. And the silence was starting to speak, louder than any weapon. The silence after the second attack felt louder than thunder across the stars. Ships from far systems picked up the signal. News spread like wind across dry grass, whispers growing from small worlds to great empires. They said the Varn had fired again and again, and Earth had not even flinched. Not once, not a single ship was harmed. And the Golden Fleet stood still, as if daring the universe to blink first. In distant halls of power, rulers leaned forward, watching their screens, watching Earth's golden ships, glowing with light, calm and silent. And proud some laughed, and called it trick some feared, and called it the start of something greater. But all of them watched, and none of them turned away. Back on the Varn flagship, Admiral Kroll walked alone to the metal halls, his boots loud on the cold floor, his thoughts heavier than ever before the third wave was ready. But he knew now that something was wrong, very wrong. He had seen planets beg. Before, he had seen fleets run and burn and scatter like ash. But these humans were not running. They were not afraid. They were not even curious. They just waited like they already knew how this would end. In the Earth Command ship, Commander Lyra stood before her crew, her voice clear and calm. The world is watching now. They will judge us not by how strong we are, but by how we choose to use our strength. Let the Varn fire again. If they must, we'll hold a line and prove that power is not in destruction, but in control. Her officers nodded, their eyes filled with quiet pride. They had trained for this day. They had sworn to protect, not to conquer. And the ships they stood on were more than machines. They were symbols of what humanity had become. Golden armor made from living alloys, crafted from gifts long forgotten, shaped by hands of peace and minds of war, joined together to form vessels that could stand against the fire of stars and still shine brighter than any weapon ever made. The third wave came faster than the first two, a storm of missiles and beams, faster, stronger, sharper. But the golden ships did not move. They held formation, glowing under alien fire. Watching with steady eyes and silent patience, the weapons slammed into their hulls and broke like waves on stone again. And again the enemy screamed, and Earth said nothing. Inside, the Varn fleet panic began to grow. Their strongest weapons failed, their best strategies crumbled. And now their admiral had gone silent. Some captains questioned the mission, others whispered about retreat, some even wondered if they had picked the wrong enemy. One young Varn pilot looked at the golden ships and whispered to himself, what are they made of, and why are they not afraid? He had never seen such stillness before. It was not the stillness of fear, it was the stillness of something greater, something unshaken. Back on Earth, billions watched the feed people in crowded cities quiet as the night soldiers in bunkers, holding breath, children pointing at screens with wide eyes, wondering if this was the day the stars learned Earth was not weak. Not anymore. Even on the moon base where the signal first echoed, engineers and scientists stood still, their instruments glowing quietly, their hands shaking with the weight of what they had built. They had dreamed of peace, they had planned for war, and now both dreams had come together in gold and silence. The Varn flagship shook under the pressure of its own failure systems, overloading weapons, heating. Without release, Kroll returned to bridge and looked out at the Golden Fleet. He felt something in his chest, not pain, not fear, but a question he had no answer for. He had believed that power was fire, that fear could win any fight, that the stars belonged to those who took them, but now he stared at ships that needed no words, no fire, no threat, and yet had stopped him cold. He gave the order, hold fire, wait. Across his fleet, weapons, dimmed engines, cooled ships floated quietly among stars. They too stared at the golden wall. Before them no one spoke, no one dared. Commander Lyra heard the silence through her monitors. She saw the pause and turned to her crew. Now we wait, let them speak if they wish, or let them listen, but we will not strike first. The Earth fleet stayed still, the lights of the golden hulls pulsing gently like heartbeats, strong and calm, waiting not for orders, but for reason. And the galaxy waited too, listening to the silence between fire and flame, wondering who would speak next and what they would say. Because the Varn had fired 3 times and still Earth had not moved, and that silence had become something greater than any weapon of silence that echoed through space, through fear, through pride, through every empire that had ever raised a blade and dared the stars to answer. And for the first time in a very long time, the stars did not laugh. They listened. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. The stars themselves seemed to pause, as if holding their breath. The golden ships remained still, glowing like ancient guardians made of fire, and peace. The Varn fleet floated opposite them, wounded not in metal, but in pride and fear. Their third and strongest attack had failed, and now their weapons were quiet, their voices unsure. Admiral Kroll stood at the center of his command bridge, staring at the human fleet, his hands behind his back, his eyes darker than ever before, his mind torn between anger and doubt. He had always believed in strength. He had always trusted fire and fear to bring victory. But now he was facing something else, something he could not bend or break. He turned to his second officer, his voice low, sent a message. He said, "Keep it simple, ask them what they want." The officer hesitated, then obeyed the signal, traveled through space across the silent battlefield into the heart of the Golden Command ship, where Commander Lyra waited surrounded by her crew, their faces calm, their eyes locked on the monitors. The message appeared, a single line glowing on the screen. It said, "What do you want?" Lyra read it once and looked out at the enemy ships. She spoke to her crew now. They asked. She said they won't understand. And now the real moment begins. She stepped forward and began to record, her voice strong but gentle, her words slow and clear. She said, "We want peace, but we do not fear war. We want to protect, not conquer. We want you to see what strength without cruelty looks like. We want you to understand that the time of fear is over." Her message was sent back to the Varn ship, where Admiral Kroll listened in silence. His crew said nothing. They watched him, waiting for an order, waiting for a reaction. But Kroll only stared at the screen. Her words echoed in his mind, strength. Without cruelty, the time of fear is over. He stepped away from the console, walked to the great window, and looked out again at the Golden Fleet. He remembered stories of Earth long ago, stories of chaos, and war stories of a people who once tore themselves apart now. They floated before him, stronger than ever, quiet and still and impossible to defeat. He whispered to himself, maybe we were wrong. Maybe fear is no longer enough. Across the galaxy, other watchers heard the message to neutral planets, far colonies, hidden fleets. Everyone listened as Earth spoke not with fire, but with truth, and the message spread like a new wind through old stars, changing minds, breaking old rules, shifting the balance of power without a single shot. On a distant station, a scholar wept at the words on a moon colony. A young girl pointed the screen and smiled in a dark war chamber. An emperor crushed his wine glass in silence. The stars were changing, and all of them felt it. Back on the Earth ship, Lyra watched the enemy fleet waiting for a reply. But there was none. The Varn ships remained still, no fire, no movement, just silence again. But this time it was different. It was not the silence of pride or threat. It was a silence of choice, a struggle, of something breaking and something else being born. Lyra turned to her communication officer open wideband. She said, "Send this to every ship on every frequency, every language, and every signal. We want the galaxy to hear it." She spoke again, this time to everyone, not just a Varn, but all who were listening. Her voice steady, her words strong. "This is Earth. We do not seek to rule. We do not come with fire. We come with strength. And with memory, we remember every hand that hurt us, and every hand that helped we do not forget. We will not forget. We stand now not alone, but united not with fear, but with hope." Her message ended, and the silence grew deeper. But inside that silence, a shift had begun on the Varn ship's officers whispered not about war, but about honor, about shame, about the old ways. And the new one captain whispered, "Maybe we need to listen." Another said, "Maybe it is time." Admiral Kroll stood motionless, then finally turned to his crew, "Stand down." He said, "Power off, weapons, hold position. Send one last message, tell them we hear them." The signal was sent, and across the stars a small, quiet line appeared on Lyra's screen. "We hear you." She smiled not with triumph, but with relief. Her crew let out soft breaths, tension flowing out like dark air rising from fire. They knew this was not the end, but a new beginning, the first step, not the final one. But it was the right step, and they had taken it without fire, without fear. The golden ships held their formation, Earth's light, reflecting off their hulls, the stars above shining brighter than before. Below them, the galaxy shifted not with explosions, but with understanding and hope. And for the first time in many generations, the stars did not burn with war. They glowed with the promise of peace. 2 days passed, and the Golden Fleet stayed in place, still and strong like statues made from light. Across the dark canvas of space, the Varn fleet remained nearby, quiet and confused, with engines off and weapons. Cold messages went back and forth, simple and short, careful and honest. It was the first time in many years that the Varn had spoken to anyone without threats and demands. In a quiet chamber inside, the lead Earthship commander Lyra sat at a long table. Her officers around her, calm and ready. On the other side of the screen was Admiral Kroll, sitting alone, his face tight, with thought, his eyes heavy with the weight of many battles both lost and won. They had agreed to talk face to face, not in person, but through the beam of shared light between their ships. Words carried on tight rays of energy, crossing the stars like bridges between two past enemies. Lyra was the first to speak, her voice steady. "And without pride, we do not ask for surrender." She said, "We ask for reason. In respect, we ask that you think before you fight, that you listen before you strike. Because we will always be ready to defend, but we will no longer be the ones who begin." Kroll looked down, then slowly raised his head. His voice was rough, but calm. "We believe you were weak." He said, "We believed your silence was fear, your light was just show, and your patience was a trap. But we were wrong, and now we must learn again." Lyra nodded, then replied, "You are not alone in learning. We too once believed that fire was the only answer, that power lived in the loudest voice. But we have changed, and now we offer you the chance to change with us." There was a long pause, and during that pause, the stars outside blinked quietly, as if waiting to hear what would happen next. Finally, Kroll spoke again. "What happens now?" He asked, "What path do we walk from here?" Lyra answered, "We open a gate, we let your scouts visit our space, and we visit yours. We speak not with weapons, but with minds, with hearts, if you are willing." And for the first time in the history of the Varn, a leader said yes to peace without losing his crown. Across both fleets, messages were sent. Officers called their families. People wept and smiled at the same time. Soldiers who once aimed weapons now stood in silence, thinking about the ones they almost destroyed and the peace they never thought possible. On Earth, the news spread like wild wind across every country, and city screens showed the two leaders speaking not with anger, but with care. Children watched their parents cry. Old veterans saluted with tired pride. People gathered in the streets not to shout, but to breathe, to hope, to believe. The golden ships opened their gates slow and wide, like arms stretching out toward old enemies. Ready to become friends, small shuttles moved between fleets not with fear, but with wonder. Aliens and humans met in cold, airless space, shaking hands without sound but with meaning in their eyes. Kroll himself boarded one of the Earth shuttles, his guards unsure and afraid, but he told them this is what strength looks like, not a fist, but an open hand. Lyra greeted him on her ship, her uniform clean, her eyes warm but sharp. She did not bow, she did not lower her head. She stood tall and strong, and so did Kroll, and for a moment there were no sides, only two beings standing on the edge of something new. They walked through the halls of the Earth's ship metal floors, glowing with soft light walls lined with names of those who came before, those who fought, those who fell, and those who rose beyond the need for war. Kroll read some names and asked who were they. Lyra answered they were the ones who dreamed of this day. They gave us this future by living and by dying, and now we honor them by choosing peace. In that moment, Kroll understood something deep, something simple. He had not lost anything by coming here. He had gained a chance to begin again, and for a warrior like him, that chance was rare and powerful. Later, the two leaders sat in the chamber again, not as enemies, but as builders of something better. They signed a first pact, not full peace, but a beginning a path to walk together. They called it the Agreement of Silence because it was born not from noise and fire, but from the stillness that came after, from the calm that followed the storm. And across the galaxy other eyes watched and saw that change was possible, that even the fiercest could find new ground, that even old wounds could lead to new roads. In the stars above, the golden ships shone a little brighter, and the Varn ships floated close not as threats, but as partners. The galaxy turned a little slower that day, as if time itself wanted to remember this moment, the moment when war paused, when fire cooled, and when two leaders chose something new. They chose to meet. The days that followed were filled with careful steps, as if each move could break the fragile path. They had begun. Earth's golden ships stayed in orbit like calm giants, and the Varn ships slowly drifted closer, their weapons still powered down, their signals no longer sharp, but open and curious. On the surface of the nearest neutral moon, a meeting place was built not in secret, but in shared work. Humans and Varn side by side, lifting steel and stone, building a hall with their hands, and their hope. The air was thin, but the mood was thick with meaning. It was not just a hall. It was a similar place where two enemies would speak and listen without fear. Commander Lyra stood at the center of the new hall, looking up at the high glass roof, stars above shining through like a map of all they had yet to learn. Beside her stood Admiral Kroll, his armor worn, but his eyes soft with something new, not weakness, but reflection. The first meeting in the hall began with silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they finally had space to feel and think, to breathe. Without pressure, leaders from other systems had joined too, drawn by the strange power of this peace between warriors who had once only known fire. An old speaker from the Rim Worlds was the first to speak, his voice shaking, as he said, "I have lived long enough to see 3 wars, but never have I seen 2 fleets stop before the 4th blow and speak across silence. Instead of death today, I believe change is not only possible but here." The room was quiet after that, but not cold. The silence was like a warm fire in winter deep, and full of memory. Leaders spoke one by one, some in hope, some in caution, some with stories of loss, others with dreams of what could come. At this moment was not wasted. Kroll spoke next, and his words were simple. "I once believed fear was the only law, but Earth has shown me another way. I do not come to beg, nor do I come to bow. I come to build and to listen. And if I fail, may history remember that at least I tried." Lyra followed with her own voice, quiet but firm. "We have known pain, we have known betrayal, and we have known the cost of silence. But we now choose to use that silence as space, not emptiness. We want peace not because we are tired, but because we are strong enough to want more than victory." After the meeting, the humans and Varn walked the moon side by side. No weapons, just voices, no shouts, just quiet talks, some about trade, others about stories and food, and even music. Old Varn officers laughed for the first time in years. Human engineers shared coffee with Varn pilots, and somewhere in the cold shadow of a crater, a child from each world kicked a ball made of metal and string. Not everything was easy. Some meetings ended in hard words, some wounds could not be closed with talks alone. There were still those who whispered that Earth was hiding power, or that the Varn were waiting to strike again. But each time the doubts rose, so did the memories of what had almost happened and what had not. In deep space, far from the moon, 2 human scouts found a wreckage drifting cold and dark. It was a Varn ship lost in the last attack. Fire had taken most of the rest, was full of silence and floating dust. But in the center of the wreck, they found something strange, a beacon still pulsing with light. Not a signal for help, but memory, a message from a Varn captain recorded before his death. The message was clear and honest. He spoke of regret of how he had followed orders, without question of how he saw the golden ships, and felt not fear, but awe, and how he wished he could have met one of them face to face. The humans returned a message to the Varn, and in a gesture no one expected, Admiral Kroll ordered that the wreck be brought home, and honored not as a symbol of defeat, but as a reminder of why they must change. On Earth, news of the moon meeting spread fast. People who once feared the sky now looked up with wonder. Classrooms taught children about the Varn not as monsters, but as another people with their own pasts and pains. Music was written, stories were told, paintings made with stars and gold, and every creation carried the same quiet message. We remember, we forgive, we move forward. The galaxy was not healed, but something was different, not perfect, not safe, but real, like a wound that no longer bled, but still hurt enough to remind you why you should not cut again. And in the new hall under the stars a flag was raised, not of one world, but to it showed no weapons, no crowns, just a circle and a bridge, and a word spoken by both leaders in their first meeting, not with fear, but with hope. Together we rise. Years had passed since the first shot that never broke a hull in the silence that echoed louder than any weapon across the stars. The golden ships still floated in the void, but now they were not alone. Beside them flew the ships of the Varn ships, once built for fear, now painted with symbols of peace, their edges no longer sharp with threat, but smooth with trust. On the moon, where the first hall was built, now stood a city of light. It grew not from conquest, but from cooperation. Every building told a story. Every path was shaped by hands from many worlds. Children played beneath trees, planted by alien gardeners. Markets filled with voices in many tongues. And in the center of all, the great hall remained a place for leaders, for dreamers, for those who once thought war was the only way. Commander Lyra, now an ambassador, walked slowly through the hall, her steps calm, her eyes steady, though streaked with the years. She carried every name of the fallen in her heart, but she also carried the names of those who lived, who chose peace, who believed even when it seemed foolish to believe. Across from her stood someone new, young and bright, the child of two worlds, born on the moon, raised by stories of unity and strength, with skin touched by the stars, and a voice eager to learn. The child looked up at Lyra and asked, how did it begin? How did you stop the fire before it burned everything? Lyra knelt down and placed a hand on the ground, her voice soft but strong. It began when we listened, she said, when we chose to wait instead of strike, when we saw not enemies, but people, when we remembered that even in silence there could be strength. In the sky above, the city's ships moved in elegant dance, not in war, but in harmony. Trade flowed across galaxies, ideas shared like seeds in the wind, art from Earth found walls in distant worlds. Songs of the Varn echoed in human halls, languages blended until they were not human or alien, but simply shared. Admiral Kroll, now a teacher, told his story to every new officer who joined the fleet. He told them of his pride and his shame, his mistake, and his change. He taught them not how to win battles, but how to avoid them, not how to lead by fear, but how to lead by listening. His voice carried the weight of old battles and the hope of new beginnings. In another part of the stars, a small planet, once ignored, now bloomed with life. It had been barren, empty, a place where two sides had nearly clashed, but now it held farms and home schools, and laughter. The ground was rich, the sky clear, and the people who lived there called it haven, not because it was perfect, but because it was made not from conquest, but from care. The alliance that grew from that first silent moment became something more than treaties, and trade became a way of thinking, a reminder that power does not need to roar, that strength can be found in waiting and choosing and standing firm, not with fire, but with purpose. Monuments were built not to glorify war, but to honor those who stood still when it mattered most. Statues of humans and Varn side by side, hands reaching across space, eyes looking not at each other, but forward into the unknown, into the stars that still held secrets and dangers and dreams. And though peace ruled most of the galaxy, not all were ready, not all believed. There were still whispers of war, shadows in the corners of light. But now those whispers were fewer, and those who carried them found no echo, only questions, only eyes that asked why when there was another way. One day a signal came from deep beyond the known edge, a call for help from a world. No one had claimed a world in trouble, not from war, but from time, from hunger, from storms. A message was weak, broken, scared, and yet it was heard. The golden ships moved first, their engines lighting up the void like suns. The Varn ships followed close, their hulls no longer shields, but wings, and beside them flew dozens of other ships from dozens of other worlds, each one answering not a command, but a call, not with weapons, but with will. As they flew, Lyra watched from the command deck, her hand steady, her heart full. She turned to a young officer beside her and said, remember this is why we fly, this is why we build ships, not to break, but to reach, not to rule, but to rise. And far below on Earth and on Haven and on the moon where it all began, people looked up and saw the ships and smiled, not because they were safe, but because they were united, because they were more than what they had been, because they had chosen something better, and they had not forgotten. They had remembered the silence that changed everything. And they answered with light,